And our last speaker, and after this we will have a short Q&A session, it's Alexander Drik, and I need to just say a few words about Euromaidan SOS. It's an initiative we started working in 2013 during the Euromaidan in the territory of Kiev, exactly, and inside, around the whole the Ukraine. And we are working like volunteer initiative. That means each person who want to be part of task which we put in for our initiative, like start to be a volunteer, and we really glad that we have high quality volunteers like Alexander Drik. So the floor is yours.
Yes, well, anti-corruption, those fighting against corruption are actually considered human rights defenders as well. But indeed, the horrors of this war have forced many of us to change our roles, to focus our attention on the issues that are most important. Well, as you probably heard yesterday, if you've been here yesterday, from the ombudsperson of Ukraine, Lyudmila Denisova, over 1 million Ukrainians, in particular 1.3 million Ukrainians, have been deported, forcibly displaced to Russia. And just for your understanding, that's the entire population of the Luxembourg and Malta combined. That's for your understanding how many people have been deported to Ukraine. And by saying deported, I actually mean it, forcibly displaced. And I'll give you 3 facts proving that it's exactly the deportation we're talking here, not the evacuation. Well, first, according to the international humanitarian law, evacuation indeed is possible by the occupying power, but only in case if it is materially impossible to do otherwise. And that is not the case. Second, we'll go into details later. I'll just list these arguments first for your general understanding. Second, Ukrainian civilians are being forcibly displaced, not only from the territories that have been occupied, but also from the zones where the fightings are ongoing. And that is forbidden. I mean, that is not allowed by international humanitarian law in general. Third, Russian military creates a coercive environment, forcing people to go to Russia because they don't have any other choice. Finally, Ukrainian civilians end up that are being forcibly displaced to Russia and Belarus, by the way, as well, go through so-called filtration camps. Next slide, please. We'll go into some details. Well, first of all, according to the international humanitarian law, as I said, the occupying power has the obligation to grant consent to open the humanitarian corridors. And Russia must have granted that consent to the Red Cross and ceased the fire so that the Ukrainian civilians could have been evacuated to the territories controlled by the Ukrainian government. However, until the recent evacuation from the Mariupol and Azovstal, Russia has given this consent only 2 times. 2 times. From Sumy and Berdansk. And that's all. Hence, the evacuation of Ukrainian civilians to the territory controlled by the Ukrainian government was materially possible, but deliberately obstructed by the Russian army. Second argument, Russia has been transferring Ukrainian civilians not only from the occupied territories, but also from the zones where the fighting is ongoing. And that has been registered in regions such as Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Sumy, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson. That's a lot, as you can imagine. The international humanitarian law does not allow any evacuation from such zones. Hence, it proves that, again, Russia deliberately conducts actions aimed at deportation of Ukrainians. Thirdly, in those instances when Russia did agree to those corridors, humanitarian convoys have been often under the fire, attacked, or obliged by acts of violence within those corridors to withdraw for security reasons. This has taken place in Mykolaiv, Irpin, Bucha, Inzil, and many other cases. The humanitarian corridor from the city of Mariupol, which was escorted by the Red Cross, was limited by the Russian troops shelling. That is just a couple of examples. The occupiers fired an evacuation bus near the city of Lutish, that's in the Vyshhorod region. Another example, the train that was to take people out from Lysychansk was cancelled because the Russian military has damaged the railways. And this picture that you see, this is a 13-year-old boy, Yelisei Rebukon, who died in the village of Peremoga. Well, you can see it on the slides. Because Russian army fired on the convoy and blew up the car. This is just a particular example of what is happening when Russia is attacking those corridors. Finally, Russian, that's just to emphasize, Russian military exercises psychological pressure, threats lives and health of the population, shells the civilian infrastructure, confiscates passports, mutes the mobile network so that Ukrainians cannot leave their, let their relatives know of their whereabouts, and they can only rely on the information that is being provided to them by the Russian military. That means that Russia has created in this discursive environment where many Ukrainians have no other choice than to live to Russia. This is yet again another particular case. This is a doctor, yes, a medical doctor, and her child. The child arrived to destination to Zaporizhzhia alone, and the whereabouts of the doctor are unknown. So this is what happens even when those transfers that should have been taken care of on the Russian side end up in the situations like this. Since we are very pressured on time, I'll jump immediately to the second issue, which is the using of Ukrainian civilians as living shields. Russia continues its unlawful and frightful practice. And again, it violates the first, second, and third Geneva Conventions. And we understand that in the present circumstances, the particular examples is what actually give you a taste of what is happening in Ukraine. So I'll give you some of those. In the very first days of the full-scale invasion, when the village of Velika Vis in Chernihiv region was occupied, the Russian army placed military equipment to the immediate vicinity of the residential buildings, hence using the buildings and the people as human shields. Another example, on March 12, illegal Russian groups took hostage of the staff and patients of the regional intensive care hospital. That's the one that you can see on the picture. People were not allowed to leave hospitals, and there were 2-3 military men on each floor, and not letting people to leave the building. Again, that's an example of Ukrainians being used as human shields. Another example, on April 21st, in the village of Zolota Balka in the Kherson region, Russian forces warned local population that in case of shelling from the Ukrainian army, they will start the massacre of the local population. That's a very bright example of using civilians as the human shield. Another example, on March 5th, in the village of Stanovo, Trostanets community, which was completely occupied by Russian military, Russian tanks were parked in the main street and in the surrounding area. Hence, Russian military was using the territory of the village and the civilians as human shields. Russia is also constantly using children as human shields, and those examples are numerous. Like, for instance, they put children on their tanks when they are relocating. They put buses with children in front of the tanks so that Ukrainian army could not fire at them. Children are being taken as hostages in a number of regions. Those are Sumy, Kyiv, Chernihiv, Zaporizhia regions. Again, just for your general understanding, as of today, 415 children have been injured, and 226 children have already died. And that's exactly the consequence, one of the consequences of these actions of the Russian military. So, as for the recommendations, because we want this to be as constructive as possible, we provided this list of recommendations that the OSCE members could do to address these issues. First, we call OSCE members to intensify the efforts to help bringing Ukrainians that have been deported to Russia and Belarus back to Ukraine. And that could include preparation of a special report on forcible deportation of Ukrainians to the territories of Russia and Belarus. Second, facilitation of dialogue with Red Cross to help deal with Ukrainians that have no documents and need assistance in Russia, because this is often the case, as you may remember, Ukrainians are being left without passports and they cannot even move in Russia and they cannot get any assistance. Third, assist with dialogue facilitation to persuade the OSCE participating states to undertake the consular functions to help Ukrainians forcibly deported to Russia. Fourth, enforce the capacity of the local actors in Russia that help Ukrainians to return to Ukraine. We also appeal to OSCE members to support the investigation of those crimes related to using civilians as human shields, because this particular activity will require high-quality specialists and technical support that Ukraine is currently lacking, and in particular laboratories for full-fledged investigations, and that could really help out in preparation of the evidence that could later on be used to bring all those liable to responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra.